So, it is Friday, June 4th, 2021, in ancient and medieval history. I will start out. This is the 32nd anniversary of the Tiananmen Square massacre in China. Now, the Chinese Communist Party wants to make this a non event. To the extent possible, they suppress this story from being told from everyone they control, from LeBron James to the average person in China. No one's allowed to talk about what they call the June 4th incident, which is Tiananmen Square. But being an American, I'm not under their control, so I'm going to say what I want to say about it because I teach history and the truth will come out. Now, they may still threaten me. I mean, the Chinese Communist Party does have a global reach, but for what it's worth, I am a life member of the National Rifle Association. So, figure it out. In any event, here's what happened. In the late 1980s, the Soviet system in Russia was falling apart. And as it was falling apart, the leader was tempted to start a war in order to unify everyone behind the flag. However, the Soviet Union had been at war for 10 years in Afghanistan, and everything that the communists did to us in Vietnam's jungles, we did to the communists as payback in the mountains of Afghanistan. The people of Russia were war-weary. Also, the leader of Russia, Mikhail Gorbachev, was not a particularly warlike fellow. He was a reformer who wanted to improve communism and make it a competitive system with freedom in the West. Well, unfortunately for him, the Soviet economy flew apart really, because among other things, American President Reagan kept putting pressure on the Russians to build new weapons and to build what ultimately bankrupted them, a space-based missile defense system that Reagan called Star Wars. So the Soviet system is shaking apart. And in 1989, people all over Eastern Europe that was controlled by them engaged in what history calls the Velvet Revolution. And what the Velvet Revolution is, peaceful protesters coming together to ask for the end of communism. Now, in the 50s, this was met by tanks and machine gun bullets. In the 60s, that was met by tanks and machine gun bullets. In the 70s and 80s, it was met by police repression, backed up, if necessary, by tanks and machine gun bullets. But this is the late 1980s. And Gorbachev does not send in the troops. Suddenly, Poland is free, Czechoslovakia is free, Hungary and Romania are free. Even Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia, which had been part of the Soviet Union, break away. Even White Russia, Belarus, and the Ukraine break away. Suddenly, the Soviet Union is falling apart. It's called the Velvet Revolution because it happened so peacefully. Ultimately, Gorbachev himself leaves Russia to go to San Francisco and become a professional speaker, which is where he still is. Freedom, for a brief period, comes to Russia between the time of Gorbachev and the time of Vladimir Putin. Under a fat drunk, but at least a good Republican named Boris Yeltsin. Now, China has similar tendencies. China had gone through its worst massacre in modern history from the 1950s to the 1970s. It's called the Great Leap Forward and the Cultural Revolution. Together, the Chinese government murders between 80 and 120 million people, its own people, in peacetime. Stalin murders half of that. Hitler murders a quarter of that, at most. The worst mass murderer in human history is the communist dictator of China, Mao Zedong. But he dies in 1975, and a new leader takes over called Deng Xiaoping. And Deng thinks that the Soviet Union's more threatening than the U.S., so he ends the genocidal policies of Mao and visits the United States. He puts on a cowboy hat, eats Texas barbecue. Seems like a cute little guy. And this cute little guy builds a Sino-American alliance, bless you, there are tissues if you need them, against the Soviet Union. Cool. We now have an ally in communist China. That's great. In the late 70s and throughout most of the 80s, American tourists come to China and are encouraged to. American businessmen are encouraged to invest in China. Uh, People are told that China is a great place to live and do business, even if you're a Westerner. The movie The Last Emperor is made there, a movie I'll show you bits of next year. However, with the increasing riches and with the increasing freedoms, whatever that is, just rip it so that you're not tearing anymore because the sound annoys me. Please, thank you. Throw it away now. Whatever. Put it in your pocket. I'll leave it to you. Just gotta be quiet. So, well done. So, people exactly my age from elite colleges around China begin to gather in the spring of 1989 in the Plaza of Heavenly Peace, Tiananmen Square, one of the focal points of public life in Beijing, China, the capital city. They, at first, are agitating for against the removal of from power of a liberalizing, reforming communist leader, and they're not killed. So after about 6 weeks, they begin expanding their rhetoric to include reforming the entire Chinese communist system, and they're not shot. So about 6 weeks later, they begin talking about replacing communism with freedom. They build a papier-mâché goddess of democracy in echo of the American Statue of Liberty and the French goddess of liberty from their revolution. American flags begin to pop up in Tiananmen Square. The Chinese students and pro-democracy demonstrators are talking about freedom. Freedom of expression, freedom of conscience, freedom of speech, freedom to decide what you're going to do, freedom from an all-powerful government, the kind of freedoms you and I take for granted every day. What will happen? What will the leadership do? Well, Deng, the Chinese leader, has seen what's going on in Eastern Europe. He's seeing the revolution, the Velvet Revolution, happen. If communism falls, every single person in the communist leadership is deeply corrupt, money corruption. They live like kings, and God, their hands are so bloody because all of them, even those that ended up turning on Mao, have lots of blood on their hands from the time when they were young and working for Mao. If the communist system falls, justice will come to these people, and they don't want that. Moreover, the Chinese Communist Party isn't about Marx or Lenin or communist theory or utopia or any of that. It's about power. In so many words, if they could burn the world but assure themselves that they would rule the ashes, they would do it. That is how utterly committed and ruthless the leadership was and is in the Chinese Communist Party. If we let this continue, Deng says, we're going to die. Communism will fall. We don't want that. So he begins to, in late May of 1989, order the army to set up a plan to surround Beijing, converge on Tiananmen Square, and make an example. Bloody, bloody example. To which senior Chinese leaders in the People's Liberation Army say, no, we're not doing that. The Russians aren't suppressing their people in Eastern Europe. We're not going to do that here. You're going to have to find a way to reform your way out of this, senior generals say. Then Gorbachev visits, the leader of the Soviet Union. So you've got the first Russian leader visiting China in 30 years. International media from all over the world, thousands of journalists from the West converge on Beijing for Gorbachev's visit. They come for Gorbachev, they stay for the pro-democracy demonstrators. These guys are fascinating to the reporters. Young college students risking their lives for the sake of talking about freedom, trying to bring freedom to the largest country in the world in terms of population. That's big news. Gorbachev leaves. The generals who said no end up falling on bullets. It's a terrible thing. They all just accidentally, boop, 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 fall on some bullets and die. Or they just disappear. They're gone. Deng then chooses a series of army units that are composed almost exclusively from country people, from the interior of China. Now, understand this. For thousands of years, the country and the city don't get along in China. The city, especially cities along the Grand Canal and along the coast, are wealthy. That's where the center of culture is. Lots of nice stuff. But the countryside, according to the city folk, is where the filthy peasants live, going to the bathroom wherever they feel like it, just living like pigs. So the city folk look down on the country folk as a bunch of pig-like peasants. The country folk realize that they're being looked at this way, and they say, God, you snobs! How dare you speak of this way? We work hard. We grow the food you eat. City and country do not get along in China. So by picking exclusively units of country soldiers, Deng is going to be sure that they're going to do what he wants. So, on the night of June 3rd, 4th, 1989, hand-picked units of the Chinese army gather around and cut off Beijing from the rest of the world. As they begin to move out in the wee hours of the morning, all the reporters who the government knows about because they spy on everyone are rounded up, taken out of Tiananmen Square, brought back to their hotels, and they are put in their hotels away from the side of the building that has a view of Tiananmen Square. So they're not going to be able to show what is going to happen there. The Communist Party does not want what's about to happen on international television. The dawn comes. An average nobody, an office worker in a cheap polyester shirt and trousers, with a pathetic cardboard briefcase and plastic bag lunch, is on his way to work, and he sees the tanks, and he realizes what the tanks are there to do. And something in him snaps. He decides that for once in his life, he's going to speak the truth of his heart, even if it means he'll never get to go home again. He leaves the curb and steps into history, steps in front of the first tank, shouting, "Stop! Don't do this! These are our people. They're not enemies. They're our people. They're our leaders. Stop!" Now, what this picture over here doesn't show is that there are over 30 tanks in this column. 30. They stop. They're all in single file. Now, why this could happen is because the Chinese army was not reliable. Deng had to cherry-pick units. He couldn't bring in as many forces as he would want. You don't send tanks anywhere without foot soldiers to guard them. Had foot soldiers been there, that man would have gotten nowhere near in front of these tanks. But no foot soldiers, because smaller army units than he could, because these army units have to be loyal. That's what Deng chooses. The radio comes back to the tank commander, halt, and wait. By this point, satellite uplink is showing what's happening live. I remember seeing it live as it happened. For 5 minutes, the tanks sit there and then they try to pull back and go around, and he gets in front of them again. Stop! These are our people. Don't kill our people. We're all Chinese together. Then they try separating and going around, and he again gets in their way, gets in their way, gets in their way. Finally, at the end of 5 minutes, the secret police show up in the hotels. They shepherd the reporters off of the balconies. They confiscate as much film as they can, and they put the reporters in the middle of the hotel with no window access whatsoever. Nobody takes a photograph of this street corner for a couple of weeks. By the way, this street corner is not in Tiananmen Square. It's near Tiananmen Square. But it was on the side of the hotels facing away from Tiananmen Square, which is why the communists would allow reporters to use those balconies and those windows. They didn't expect anything to happen. This happened spontaneously. The next time somebody's able to photograph this intersection, it's 2 weeks later, and there's a smear on the ground where the man used to be. Clearly what happened after the cameras were cut off and the satellite links were done is that tanks rolled over him, tank after tank after tank, turning him from a human being into a stain on the street. This is a martyr to democracy, to the kind of freedom you and I take for granted every day. This guy died for that. He didn't have to. He chose to, because he chose to say the truth that as he saw it, to a government that wasn't interested. Instead, tanks rolled into Tiananmen Square. Now, most of the killing doesn't happen in the square. The tanks are purposefully driving the pro-democracy protesters in a particular direction. And in the 2 or 3 blocks downrange from Tiananmen in that direction, that's where the slaughter happens. Thousands of pro-democracy demonstrators are killed. Thousands more are captured, not only in Beijing, but all around China, because similar demonstrations had begun in the other cities of China. These prisoners are tortured for information and for fun, so that they can reveal other traitors. And then either they're sent back to their families as broken, brainwashed effigies of who they used to be, or they're fattened up in the final weeks of their life. They're shot in the back of the head with a single bullet. Their family is billed for the price of the bullet. And their organs are sold for money on the international black market. That's how China does business. The Chinese Communist Party, with this massacre, make their stance clear. In communist China, we have a free market economy, which is kind of counterintuitive. It's much more like the Nazi economy, where the Nazi Party allowed people to get rich, but made sure that everyone did what they wanted. This is how China works. And every company that does business in China, whether it's American, British, Italian, or Chinese, the Communist Party has representatives on every level, on every factory floor, in every boardroom. The NBA that operates in China has Communist Party leaders as a part of all of its operations. The deal that the Chinese Communist Party is offering to its people after Tiananmen Square is very clear. You can get rich. You can get stinking rich. You can get so rich in business that you can own a Lamborghini. You can live in a mansion with servants. You can have anything your heart desires. You can be so stinking rich because the Chinese economy is less heavily regulated, you're going to love this, in some respects than the American economy. So you can get stinking rich, but don't talk politics. Don't get involved in politics. Don't make comments on politics. Most of all, don't criticize us, the Communist Party of China, because if you do, what happened to them will happen to you. And that is the system that they still have to this day. And that's the deal that they still have to this day. We'll let you be rich, but you're going to be ours. Free markets, but not free politics. You're allowed to be creative in business, but not when it comes to your own conscience or your own ideas. So, this is the 32nd anniversary of that, and since a lot of people around the world are afraid to talk about it, I thought I would. It's an anniversary worth remembering. Any questions, comments, or thoughts before we move on to talk about the Middle Ages some more? Okay. If you change your mind, you know where I am. Yes.
Will you send Ella Jurassic out? She's leaving.
Oh, we're gonna get rid of her. Yeah. No, have a wonderful day.
Thank you.
Yeah. Take care. That was good timing too. Do you have any questions? Yes. Can Ella leave? Okay. We'll miss you. Try to see the rest of the video at home. Okay, and have a good weekend. Okay. Where were we? We had talked about the Pope's side in their conflicts with the church. We had talked about the Pope's side in their conflict with the kings of Europe. I got it right that time. Let's talk about the kings and the emperor's side. The imperial and royal claim to supremacy is also rooted in God. Every monarch takes a coronation oath to rule by God in a Christian fashion. Every single one of them takes this coronation oath. It's really bad. Just noticed. Oh, okay. I don't have to work on this. Just have maintenance work on it. Anyway. So, since we swear a coronation oath to rule, say, England, as one particular country, but this is true for all kings and the Holy Roman Empire, God gives us trust to rule our nation. It's our nation, given to us by divine right, the divine right of kings. If God didn't want me to be king, he wouldn't have made my mama queen. He wouldn't have made my daddy king. I'm king because God wanted me to be king. And I have taken a holy oath to rule in his name. I'm happy to work with the church, but the church is not going to be supreme over me in my own land. A land that God gave me to rule in his name. The followers of the royal party in the Holy Roman Empire are called Ghibellines. So you have Ghibellines supporting the emperor and the kings, and Guelphs supporting the pope. Guelph versus Ghibelline. Again, it sounds like some weird fantasy novel. What are you? Oh, I'm a Ghibelline. Well, Ghibellines support the royals, and Guelphs support the popes. Now, you've got Frederick Barbarossa, the Holy Roman Emperor who dies on his way to the Holy Land by breaking his neck while crossing a stream. You've got Henry II of England. You've got John of England. You've got Philip of France. You've got all of these various kings saying the same thing in different languages. This land is my land. This land is not your land. You may have churches here, but you're going to do things my way. I could go on, but I won't because you haven't suffered. And I won't sing to you because you haven't been bad. I'm not going to sing to you even if you've been bad. I don't want to reward you by singing.
You sure?
Never mind. Reward, punishment, it's all the same thing. It's an experience that will leave you screaming and saying, no, make it stop.
What?
Me singing. I actually sang to the school once. You may have been here, you may not. It was on one of the anniversaries of the September 11th attacks, and I did, oh God, this cheesed off some of my more liberal colleagues as teachers. We did a remembrance, and I led in the national anthem. And what I heard afterwards from several students was learn to sing on key, because I didn't. But
What year was this?
it was a few years ago. You may or may not have been here. I don't know. But you can ask people about the time.
What happened was like
Yeah. But I also talked about our Islamist enemies and not all Muslims. Well, you can imagine. Anyway, Ghibellines, Frederick Barbarossa, the kings all say this: we should appoint our bishops, not you. I don't mind as a king the Pope offering suggestions on who should become bishop. I don't mind that at all. I don't mind having the conversation. But the final choice of who will be the leading churchman in my country, the person I will have to work hand in glove with in terms of handling the people and their religious needs and their social needs, I do not want an enemy of mine appointed by a power-hungry pope who's going to undercut and undermine me every chance he gets. I need someone I can work with. So the kings demand that they be able to appoint bishops. Here's another thing that the kings demand, and it has to do with trials. I'll just put a box here and write the word trials. Trials. Not trails. I don't have dyslexia. Trials. Trials. You say trails. Are they happy trails? Trials. Okay. There's a person who's accused of a crime. How are we going to find out whether this person is guilty? And if they're guilty, how are we going to punish them? The king is responsible for what is called the high justice and the low justice. The low justice is what we would call misdemeanor crimes. Jaywalking, spitting on the sidewalk, that sort of thing. Fairly small crime. Speeding is a misdemeanor, unless you're really speeding ridiculously fast. The high justice deals with what we would call felonies. Felonies are major crimes: extortion, assault, kidnapping, rape, arson, murder, attempted murder, revolution, that sort of thing. Serious, serious crimes. So the king has the high justice and the low justice. And the king appoints courts and judges to deal with people. However, if the person accused of a crime is a priest or a monk or a nun, they can't be tried in a royal court. They can't. They've got to be tried in a church court. And what if I don't like that? What if the fact that they're judged in a church court is going to make me look weak? What if the church court lets an evidently guilty person walk free? Not that that ever happens in the real world all too often. Justice demands that the criminals in my land face the same standards of evidence and justice. Otherwise, it's open season. The church says no, because churchmen, clergy are not your subjects. They are subjects of the Pope. They have a different allegiance, and we're going to judge them in papal courts and church courts. And we're going to judge them not by your crazy royal laws, but by canon law, which is a universal church standard for law. So this is another thing they disagree about. Where are people tried if they're accused of a crime, if they're a member of the clergy? And in the end, the choice is the royals want them in royal courts, the church wants them in church courts. But that's not all. There's another thing. It's called sanctuary. Sanctuary, you say? Sanctuary. I'm going to whisper it. Well, probably not much longer. Sanctuary. Just sounds good. Are you familiar with the story of the Hunchback of Notre Dame? Okay, then you know a little bit about sanctuary. Here's basically what it is. I'm on the lamb. That does not mean I'm on a little baby sheep. That is colloquial lingo for I am running from the law. I'm running. The law's trying to catch me. They think I'm guilty of a crime. I don't want to be punished, whether I'm guilty or not. I am going to try to escape, but I can't. I can't get out of town. They've got the roads blocked. They've got watchtowers in the hills. I've tried. I can't get out. Every time I get close to the edge of town, people almost catch me. And then you end up running into the church. Not like, bam, ow, the church. But you run, opening the door, closing the door, and you're inside the church. And the first word you say, the first word that comes out of your mouth is sanctuary. Sanctuary. I ask for sanctuary. Bless you. The town guards, the royal soldiers can't come in. It's church ground. The church has a separate legal system. If the town guards or the royal soldiers come in, bless you, tissues over there if you need them. If they come in, it's going to be a colossal political mess. It's going to be like a hand grenade went off in a, what do you call those little things? Dolls made of porcelain. In a porcelain doll factory. It's going to be messy. So suddenly, kings say, we have bona fide criminals, bad people, who can run into a church, say a 3-syllable word, and not get caught? This is nuts! Just say it. It's nuts! So the kings are not happy about sanctuary. Now, the truth is, the church is not going to keep, Bluebeard, the murderous pirate, inside a church. If this person is an obviously guilty person, or if the church finds out, they'll find a way to pressure him to leave. They also can deny sanctuary. Sanctuary will be granted under certain circumstances, but not under all. You can ask for sanctuary, but the church gets to decide whether or not you're going to get it. I've got to turn the fan on. If the fan bothers you, please move. It needs some moving air. So, these are all problems that the kings have with the popes and the church. You know how Canossa was the high point of papal power? Well, now, papal power. Power of the papal. Now I'm going to tell you about the high point of royal power. There is a controversial election in Rome. A new pope is appointed. The French don't like it. The French march their army down to Rome. A new pope is declared. The old pope is gone. The pope the French didn't like. And the new pope that the French do like decides, you know what? I may be the pope, But I don't want to be the Bishop of Rome anymore. I want to be in Avignon. Avignon? Avignon! What's Avignon? Avignon is a resort town in South France. It's got mild winters. It's got warm summers. It's got cool breezes. It's got beautiful trees. It's got all the wonderful things you can think of that France has to offer. And I want to go to Avignon. The French army say, "Are you sure?" The Pope says, "Oui. I want to go to Avignon." So the church watches in horror as the leader of the Roman Catholic faith abandons Rome and goes with the French army to southern France. In Avignon, the Pope becomes a pulpit. Hello, pulpit, 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 pulpit. Hey, pulpit, how you doing today? Doing well. How do you think I'm doing? I can't do ventriloquism. I'm not Jeff Dunham. I can say, "Silence, I kill you," but it's not the same. The Pope is a pulpit. He is a puppet of the French king. Suddenly, the Roman Catholic Church is doing the most darndest things, taking sides in disputes involving France, always choosing the French side. Things like that. French wine over Italian wine at the table. It's crazy. So the other kings of Europe say, "Hey, wait! If the French can have their own pope, I want one of those." So they, other kings in Europe, Holy Roman emperors and so forth, they appoint alternative popes that come from a process about as legitimate as the one that went to Avignon, which is an illegitimate process. It was clearly the French military appoints a pope. So now, you've got the Pope in Avignon, you've got other popes elsewhere in Europe, and each of the popes call each other anti-pope and anti-Christ. Now, understand, for a Christian to use the word antichrist is about the worst insult you can give. Christians are all about Christ, the example and love of Jesus. And antichrist is the embodiment of diabolical evil on this earth. Not come to bring light and salvation, but to bring darkness and oppression. These popes, and at one point there are 8 of them, 8 popes, call the other 7 anti-pope and anti-Christ and illegitimate, and you've got pope-on-pope violence, armies fighting one another, and no one knows who's legitimate and who's not. If you're a poor Christian or a parish priest or you own a monastery, which pope do you pledge allegiance to? You know, there's a scene in a really classic Western called The Outlaw Josie Wales with Clint Eastwood. And if you've never seen it, you should. It's an incredible movie. And in a scene that takes place right after the Civil War, you get this creepy little ferryman and his big, dumb son. And the way the ferry works is there's some ropes and there's a big flat plank. And you put your horses and your gear on the plank. It's a raft. And then the ferryman and the big dumb son pull your way across. So, a group of former Confederate soldiers wants to cross the river in order to get away from Union soldiers that are chasing them. As they're pulling, the ferryman and his son doesn't say much except for his special needs, before there were special needs described. But the ferryman is singing, "I wish I were in Dixie, hooray." See, I'm singing to you. Hooray, I wish I... And Dixie is the national anthem of the South in the Civil War. And he lets the Confederates off, and on the other side there are Union cavalry saying, "Get back here, lead us across." So, I got to do it or they'll shoot me. And the Confederates say, "Go ahead." So the guy, "I wish I were in Dixie, hooray," and halfway across, "Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord," which is the battle hymn of the Republic, "Glory, glory, hallelujah," which is the song of the Union in the Civil War. Goes from Dixie to battle hymn without breaking a note, without breaking a rhythm. In this Pope versus anti-Pope environment, you support whoever has an army nearest to you. And you try to do it in the least obnoxious way possible so that nobody remembers. If you can get through this without declaring for any of these guys, you'll be fine. But almost no one can get through it without declaring for one of these guys. I will explain how this is resolved another time. The hell with it. I'll explain it now. So how is this going to be resolved? Soon everyone realizes this isn't working. The Avignon Pope isn't listened to outside of France. The German Pope isn't listened to outside of Germany. You get the idea. So a council, a church council is called. And at this church council, leaders from all the factions come together and make the following agreement. All current popes are gone. They're resigned. They're out. They're kaput. There will be a new election in Rome, and the Pope will be elected by the College of Cardinals, just like they should be. And this is like 80 years later. So the Babylonian captivity of the church is the Avignon papacy. So 70, 80 years later, there's going to be a new Pope chosen in the traditional style, and he's going to stay in Rome, and that's it. We, the kings of Europe, are going to take our talons out of the church and allow the church to have its own leadership again. So Canossa may have been a sweet moment for Pope Innocent III, but in the end, the kings have their way with the church a lot more than the church has their way with the kings. Why? Who has the bigger army? So eventually, this council is going to solve the problem of Pope versus anti-Pope. Any questions on that before we move into what really makes a civilization? Cities. See no questions. Okay. Yes?
Is there a reason why the armies did not oppose the election of the people, which the armies of all the nations who previously had populace, as you said?
Well, armies ultimately serve who pay them. Now, there are individuals who are exceptions. There are men of principle in all armies who won't cross certain lines. Right now, I'm rewatching HBO's miniseries on Rome. And there's a soldier in Caesar's army who's very, 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 very traditional. And he's asleep, injured, when Caesar crosses the Rubicon and becomes a traitor until he wins the Civil War. And when the guy wakes up, his name is Varenus, he realizes that he's south of the Rubicon River, and he almost tries to kill himself because he's so upset, because now he's a traitor. But it's done. There's nothing he can do about it. For the most part, armies follow whoever pays them. And if the king pays and controls the army, the king gets to call the tune. And the king, remember, has tamed churchmen. There are many people in the local church that support the king even more than they support the pope. All of this is basically a colossal mess. And the reason it's a colossal mess is, okay, I've got to explain it in these terms. Do you, Ralph, take Tina to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold, to love, honor, and cherish, till death do you part? I say I do. Do you, Christina Marie Dominic, take Ralph Genorio to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have, to hold, to cherish, to love, honor, and obey, till death do us part? She said yes. We're traditional. We had traditional vows. I now pronounce you man and wife. Till death do us part. And we have been very fortunate. We are still together. We've been married a very long time for people our age, and we're still happy. Thank God. But my parents didn't have that experience. They were divorced before it was usual for a couple to divorce. And many of you, either from your own families or from families that you know how common divorce is. Divorce happens for any number of reasons. It doesn't usually happen because one person is an angel and one person reveals to be a devil. Usually, there's good on both sides and there's fault on both sides. In the end, ultimately, I had to accept that my father and my mother simply stopped loving one another and they didn't really want to put in the effort to work together. It happens. The church and the state in the Middle Ages were intended to work together. The government of the king would protect the country and rule the country, handling its laws, protecting, stopping banditry, stopping rebellion, stopping foreign invasion, and giving people a sense of pride. They would provide order. The church would provide, like a mother, the nurture, the mass, the sacraments, the last rites, the charity, the healing, the education. So the state, the king's government, was like the traditional old-fashioned father, and the church was like the traditional old-fashioned mother. But like many married couples, the time simply came when the church and the state didn't love each other anymore. They didn't get along anymore, and so they were separated. Now, in the Middle Ages, they got separated, came back, they got separated, came back. But we are talking about really what is in effect a divorce, the breakup of a family, the breakup of a marriage. And so the loyalties of people are not simple, they're very complex. And it is a horror show, strictly because these two institutions are supposed to work together for our benefit, just like a child looks to the father and the mother to help them with life. Now, dad and mom may not be perfect, but they're supposed to work together. In some cases, it's better that they don't. There are some families I know that were better off broken up than if they had stayed together. So it's complicated. But they really should be working together. And the fact that they don't is a testimony to the greed of human nature and the fragility of human ego and how prone to desperation and lashing out we are. I don't know if that's a satisfying answer, but it's the only one I've got. Okay. Cities are settlements so large that if trade broke down, most people would die. Now, cities usually exist best where there's long-distance trade. So the city of Damascus exists in Syria, or Antioch in Syria, or Jerusalem, or Rome, or Athens, or any of these places, even Paris and London. And where they work best is where they have long-distance trade, where they can trade with people hundreds or even thousands of miles away, so that the people in the city can buy all that they need. And so that their markets have stuff from all over the known world. So cities and long-distance trade, to some extent, go hand in hand. There are times when you have cities without much long-distance trade, but they tend to be shaky. The best and most stable cities are part of societies that are able to buy olives from the Middle East and tin from Britain and copper from Spain and, artichokes from North Africa, whatever. You get the idea. And they can all go to Rome and be in a market, and the people of Rome can buy from them. And they need these markets because without the markets, the people in the cities die. Cities are the only meritocracy in all of the Middle Ages in terms of locales. A meritocracy, Meritocracy. Does anyone want to tell me, by knowing or guessing, what a meritocracy is?
Is it like the people who work really hard and have merit, like are the ones that rule?
Yeah, it's like a free market. And a free market, if you work hard, harder than people around you, and you have good ideas better than the people around you, you're going to be richer than them. You're going to be better off than them. And if they don't like it, too bad. They can work harder. They can get their own wealth. Meritocracy, though, is more than money. There's a fairness to it. Let's look at grades, because you're all students, and you get paid in grades for how much work you put in. Some of us, not me, maybe not you, but some of us believe socialism is a neat idea. So we could do grades socialism. A students, F students, everyone gets a C minus. Everyone gets a C minus. Now the F students, if they're unscrupulous and greedy and have no self-respect, will go, yeah, I get a C minus, woo, revolution. Whereas you can imagine, If you're a C student or a B student or an A student, it's not a fair system, is it? You're working hard and you're not getting the benefits of it. Somebody's not working at all and they're getting some of the benefits of what you should get, but you're not getting it, they are. The quality of grades are being redistributed because somebody thinks everyone deserves an equal grade. School should be a meritocracy. Athletics should be a meritocracy. War should be a meritocracy. And ideally, business and life should be a meritocracy. If you've got talent, you use that talent. Whatever that talent is, unless you're like, I got a talent for kidnapping and murder. No, don't develop that. But other talents are really, you develop them. If you're a good speaker, if you're a good writer, if you're good at math, if you're good with your hands, whatever it is, if you're just a hard worker, give me work, I'll do it. You should succeed. You should get what you earn. But the Middle Ages, outside of cities, is not a meritocracy. You are what your daddy does. So if your daddy is a poor turnip farmer, you're a poor turnip farmer. If your daddy's a king, you're going to be king. Just can't wait to be king. If your daddy is a gardener, you're going to be a gardener. You could have a black thumb. Plants could tremble at your approach, going, don't come near me, don't come near me. And then they die because your presence kills plant life. You're going to be a gardener. If your dad's a doctor, this is the scary thing. Somewhere in the world is the worst doctor. The terrible thing is that somewhere somebody has an appointment with him tomorrow. If you're clumsy, if you're forgetful, hey, where did I put the scalpel? Oh, left it in the patient again. You don't want that guy to be your doctor. Even if it's not a sharp object. Oh, where's the spoon? Oh, it's in his gut. We got to go back in. I don't want to go back in. So he has a spoon in his gut. Big deal. Get the spoon out. No, I don't want to do that. I might leave something else in there. You don't want me to leave a needle in there, do you? No. And deal with the spoon. Okay. You don't want the world's worst doctor. But in a medieval society, you are what your daddy does. How many of you want to do exactly what your father does for a living? Don't even raise your hands. I don't want to know. Some of you might. Some of you might not. How many of you women want to do what your mom does for a living? I don't want to know, but think about it. If your life was going to be following that of your parent that closely, how happy are you going to be about things? But in a town or a city, that isn't the way things work. In a town or a city, it's a meritocracy. You get a job. You don't inherit one. You get one. If you're able to handle stink and stench and foul water and not get bothered by it, you can work as a tanner, which is a leather worker that turns hide into leather. Or you can work in a dye works that takes cloth and colors it in a way that it's going to stick. If you're really strong and you have good control, you could be a blacksmith or a tinsmith or a coppersmith. If you are good with machines, you might be a wheelwright or a barrelwright or a shipwright. You might work in the mill. You get paid for what you do. You get better jobs by learning to do more valuable things. That sort of sounds like what we have. So the old expression that exists in the towns, my last word, city air is free air. It stinks on ice. You've got all these industries. But you can be who you want to be. Meritocracy. Have a great weekend if I don't see you. Even if I do, have a great weekend. Take care.
Thank you, Mr. Demarno.
Thank you.
It's funny because my mom is actually